Good afternoon and Happy New Year, everyone. My name is Randy McDonald, and I am very happy to welcome you to our webinar today on tips and tricks to increase student engagement. And we have members of our staff from ESAIL, the Engineering Studio for Advanced Instruction and Learning, that are going to be making presentations today. And we're also very happy to have a special guest. Dr. Shauna Thomas is also with us and has been helping us deliver this workshop over the break. And we're very happy to have her here today. And she's going to be sharing some great information from her own experiences. So we're happy to have you all here today and happy to have everyone logged on and getting ready for a new semester. So this is a workshop on student engagement, or a webinar rather, and we're going to have some student engagement in today's webinar. You play the role of the student, and so we're going to be asking for your engagement and your participation. Let me go ahead and give a little more introduction to today's session. In a moment, we're going to talk about those benefits of engagement, and we're going to have information on techniques for using breakout rooms and polling in Zoom. We're going to talk about planning for interaction and engagement. And we're going to talk about planning and presentation design for live synchronous delivery. We're also going to talk about planning and presentation tips for online asynchronous delivery. And then we'll share some additional resources that you can use and reference after the presentation is over. A few other points that we want to bring out is that student engagement allows for clarification of understanding. So especially if you allow students to ask questions or allow them to express what level of understanding they have, then it gives us as an opportunity to make clarifications. It also provides students, depending on how you're planning and what the engagement activity is, it provides an opportunity for students to apply or rehearse the new concepts that they've been learning. And as we know from learning theory, being able to apply what you've learned or to rehearse it helps the learning to stick with you longer. As we said, it can clarify muddy points. It also creates social network for future support, meaning that students might have an opportunity to get to know one another and to make connections so that they could set up study groups or help one another in other ways, maybe with the teaching assistant. And as was said by some of you, it's fun. So several great benefits to student engagement. And of course, that's what we all believe in. And that's why we're here today. So at this point, we want to go ahead and turn things over to Dr. Shauna Thomas. Many of you may know Shauna already. She is an instructional assistant professor here at Texas A&M University, and she believes strongly in student engagement and promoting student success. And we're very happy that she's agreed to join us today and present some things from her own knowledge and experience. So, Shauna, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you at this time.
Great. Well, hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here and glad to, share kind of what I've experienced in my classes, and hopefully you'll find them helpful and low bar to put into yours. So let me share my screen here. All right, good. All right, so one of the problems I had in my classes, and I don't think I was the only one, is that sometimes when you ask a question or you want to start a discussion, especially if the class is big, it can be really hard to do it. You ask it and everyone just stares at you. I think they're hoping someone else will answer the question or start. And, some of my classes have 100 students in them, and you have to have some bravery to speak up in front of all those classmates. And so I understand why I was having a problem, but I didn't want it to stay that way. So one of the tools I used was polls. And I'm not sure if you've used a poll before, but they're really simple to set up. And I was really amazed at how quickly students got excited about it and engaged, and it started their conversation going with just this simple trick. So the reason why polls work is it helps students feel more comfortable to share. They can know that they're doing it in a safer way that's somewhat anonymous. And then when you talk about the results, you can point out similarities and differences without having to single anyone out. So you're not putting anyone on the spot with that. That one person might know that they're in the possible smaller group that answered the poll one way, but they're not being identified that way with their peers. And so that helps them be more comfortable to share in the first place. And then once they kind of get this, like, oh, I put my answer in a poll, I've kind of started to think about the question, and I saw that I'm not alone. Then when you ask them to discuss, they're more ready to do it. What I love about polls is they're easy. You can put them in any class session. It doesn't take a whole lot of prep work ahead of time. I've even done it live. On the spot. We were having my students were doing this activity where they're designing a point of sale system, and for Lane's chicken fingers, which I personally like. But then there came this discussion, well, is Cane's better, Lane's better? And even though it didn't relate to the point of sale system they were developing, I was like, let's make a poll, let's see. And so it got them excited. So then when they went to the point of sale system creation, they were excited about it. They were somewhat invested in it. It was just with the simple, which is better kind of poll. As students practice sharing low risk things, they're more likely to share the higher risk things because they've had this experience that, oh, this is a safe place. The instructor's not going to shoot me down. No one's going to, ridicule me for what I might say. I can share. And it keeps students this habit of staying engaged and watching, because it's not just I'm sitting watching a video. It's now I have to answer a poll. I have to do something. I have to respond. So this is really great tool. You can also do it to ask about what experiences they might have had before with your topic or what prior knowledge. And that gets them to start sharing with their peers, which they'll listen much better when their classmates share, I find, sometimes than they will to me. So it can be a really powerful tool to help get them started. So here's an example of one I used in my class this last semester. This is a computer science course where they're learning about software development principles and methods. And so we were going to talk through these different strategies. And so beforehand, I asked them, hey, tell me what kind of experience you've had. And it's a question that everyone can answer. There's no right or wrong answer. So it's very, low stakes. I'm not using it in their grading or, anything like that. And so then they can all of a sudden see, oh, some of my classmates are just like me. They've had experience, or they've never had experience, or they have no idea what I'm talking about, right? And it helps them realize they're not alone, especially in a class where some of my students are on Zoom and they're probably sitting in a room alone. It helps build this kind of community that they're not isolated. And so then I can point out, trends that we see and then start to talk about them. And then I can even say, hey, I see that a few of you have done pair programming before. Someone tell me about that, right? And I know that someone's done it because they've answered the poll that way. So it gives me confidence to wait longer to hear the response instead of just assuming, oh, well, I guess no one's done this. I have the answer already. And I can even go, hey, I know some of you have done it. What was it like, right? And then someone starts to speak up. And then once one does, it's like a domino. Then they're like, oh, I can do that too. So it's been really effective that way. And then I also, like, for the same one, I asked a follow-up poll. I said, hey, how was your experience if you had one? And not presuming that they've had a good experience with the methods I'm about to teach them, but what was it like? And then having students share, and then we can discuss, why was it positive? Why was it negative? What do you think could have been done differently? And that was much more valuable than me just walking them through what each method was and how you do them. They got to hear from their peers kind of, how it really goes, right, in the real world. Because they'll say, oh, I had this internship and I got to do this. And then everyone's like, oh, that was cool. Yeah, I did this. Or, yeah, it didn't work for me. My manager did, such and such. So we talked about that. And so it was a really great discussion just from asking them this poll. And I know if I had just cold asked them, hey, anyone did an internship? What was it like using this? I wouldn't have gotten a response. The other thing I used a poll to do is to help them to share a personal preference so that I can then get them to think about something else. So for example, here I asked them this very, safe question. Hey, what editor do you like to program in, right? There's no right or wrong, etc. And we were talking about that day, different ways of writing code and style guidelines. And so I get them started talking about this, and then I go, okay, can your editor conform to these style guidelines? Can your editor do this? And I start to apply it to the content material. But I start with a question that's very easy for them to answer. Everyone has an opinion about it. And so, yeah, and then they can see, oh, this one's really popular, this one's not. And it gets them excited about the class. So here's some tips is to make it, when you ask a poll a question, to make it really low bar. You want to ask a question so that everyone can have a response. So for example, I didn't just ask, what is your experience? I first asked, do you have experience, right? Everyone can answer that question. I also make it no stakes, so it's completely anonymous. That allows them to feel really safe in the response they give and not feel like, oh, what if I get it wrong? I don't use pollings to assess like as a quiz. If I'm going to do that, I'll use a quiz. I use polling solely for engagement. I also try to make it personal, like I talked about the restaurant preference, so they get excited about it, or their coding editor preference. That helps them kind of tap into those passions that they might have, and then they're ready to listen to the rest of the material. It can support a discussion by taking what their responses are and then let's talk about them. Let's talk about the trend. Why is it this way? Why isn't it that way? Were you surprised? Is that what you expected? Those kinds of questions. And every time someone responds, you validate the fact that they respond. Like, I'm glad you shared that, so-and-so. And what I love about Zoom is it has their name on there. So I can, just say, hey, Sam, yeah, I'm really glad you said that. And that reminds me of this. And I can, with a chat history, I can look back and go, oh yeah, that's when so-and-so said the similar idea, right? And then it starts to go, oh, okay, this is a supportive environment. I also do polls quite frequently, not necessarily every single class session, but many of them. It just gets them in the habit of sharing and discussing and knowing that when they come to class, they're not just watching a movie or sitting passive. They're going to have to do something, but some of the things they're doing, it isn't hard and it can be quite fun. I've used, there's a bunch of different tools. I suggest to use whatever you're comfortable with and whatever you're already using for something else makes it an easy way to start. So you can do them with eCampus. You can do them on Canvas. They're called surveys there. I've done them on Canvas. I've also done them in Zoom. And then I've used different websites where I maybe wanted to do something live. So all of these websites allow you to do different kinds of polls, and you can do all kinds of things like word clouds and pie charts and bar charts and all kinds of, fancier things. Or you could just keep it really simple and say, here's a Google form, fill it out, and then you can look at the results live with them. The other thing I wanted to share is the class I taught does a lot of group work activities. And normally, if we're all in person, they would be at their different tables, and I can walk around and watch and see if some table is having trouble and go, help them out or see someone's hand raised. And it's really hard to do that in Zoom. It seems like Zoom's a black hole, right? So, because you send them off, they're in their own breakout rooms. You're not there, you can't use proximity to help keep them on task. And it's, you're losing a little bit of that body language and communication that you used to have. So the way I've gotten around this and to help make that time really effective for my students is to give them a very clear structure. This is what we're going to do and why we're doing it. Here's what you need to complete. And here's the amount of time you're going to have. And then as we are in the breakout rooms, I'll send them an update. Hey, you have 5 minutes left, 2 minutes left, that sort of thing. So they're not ever surprised, like, oh, it's time to go. And I make sure that they have just enough time to do the task so they know that when they get sent over there, they need to work right away. In the first few sessions, they always come back going, that wasn't enough time, but they get the rhythm of it and they know, okay, we can't just hang out for half the time and then decide to get to work. We really need to work. The other thing I do is to virtually walk the breakout rooms. And so I have my TAs help me with this. I usually stay in the main room in case a student has a question. They can always come to the main room and ask. But then I send my TAs to the different rooms and I rotate them around. And then when the TA's been there for a few minutes, they'll come back to the main room and I'll send them to the next one. And I let the students know that this is going to happen so that they're not feeling like they're being snooped on, but I tell them, hey, we're going to pop in and out of the rooms just to check and make sure you don't have any questions or there's not anything we can help with. And they've been really responsive with that. They enjoy that. Sometimes the TA has lots of questions that they answer, and sometimes they're like, nope, they're on track, they're on task, and they move on. So when I give them the kind of support I give them is I tell them what they're going to do, how much time they're going to have to do it, and then what comes next. So what are we going to do with whatever they produce? So if they're going to discuss something in a small group, I'll tell them we're going to share the discussion as a big group. Or if they're building a design, then I'll say you're going to go build the prototype, and then we're going to use the prototype to do this when you come back. So they know that the work they do is important and is going to get used. We also, at the end of the class session, I collect their work electronically and they get graded and assessed on the quality of their work. So they know that this is important. It helps give them some accountability and focus when they're working in those rooms. And then the last thing I do is when I usually have a worksheet that they're filling out, and I divide it up into small segments. I give them the whole sheet at once, but then I tell them, we're going to do this piece, and then I'm going to bring you back in 5 minutes. Then we're going to discuss and we'll do the next piece. This helps them not get lost or like way off track or spend way too much time on a certain part, and keeps a nice pace for them. I also help remind them that there's a lot of ways they can ask for help. They can always do the ask for help button in Zoom. They can go to the main room. And I also have a shared Google Doc. It's a blank document that I share with the class before we start. I say, I'm watching the document. If you have a question, put it in there. Because unfortunately with Zoom, they can't in their breakout room send me a chat message if I'm in the main room. So I use Google Docs to help facilitate for them. And each class session, I remind them, remember, I'm going to put you in your breakout rooms and you're going to have 5 minutes to do this. And I'll give you the 2-minute warning. Remember, you can ask for help. The TAs are coming by. You can always, put something in the shared doc. I put the link in the chat for them. Again, even though the link is always the same, it helps keep it at their fingertips so they don't feel like I need some help and I don't know how to get it. I want to show you let me find it here. I want to show you what one of these looks like. So you can see. So the way I structure in class is I'll present, here's the problem you're going to work on. So for this one, Tam, I say A&M needs a new Howdy system. You all have experience with it. Now you want to make something that's more streamlined for the student. And I'm going to put you in your breakout rooms, and here is your jobs. Assign the roles and decide your construction environment, because we were talking about that day. And I tell them a time frame. And then when they come back, I say, okay, now you're going to do this. You're going to draw a sketch, and then you're going to come back. And then when they can do it again, I'm saying, okay, now you're going to do this with your sketch. What are the next steps? So I break it up into really small pieces for them. And at the end, I say, all right, when you're done, make sure you submit your work to Canvas. I have it as a group assignment for them. I want to remind them that, you do need to turn this in. And then a worksheet that they would get that accompanies this looks something like this, where I have them put everyone's group name and UIN. This is just in case there's some mess up with the submission in Canvas and I need to match and make sure I know who exactly worked on this document together. Then I usually give them some roles. I say, I need you to assign a role, and here they are. So they know that they have a specific task to do. It helps give them focus. And then the same instructions that I had on the slide are here, but with more detail. And they'll take this document and they'll edit it, and then that's what they'll submit to Canvas as a PDF. The thing I also do at the very end, which is because some students are online, you may have this issue where some students decide 20 minutes before class is over that they're done for the day and they log off. Well, that's not fair to their teammates. And so their teammates need a way to communicate to me, hey, so-and-so really didn't, pull their fair share here, or so-and-so was absent today. That's not the right one I want to show you. So what I do here is they need to write their name, what percentage each person participated, and they put their initials kind of like a signature. And I tell them most of the time, these are going to all be even percentages, or it might be a 0 if someone wasn't there that day. But sometimes they might be different, and that gives them enough accountability that after the first few assignments, pretty much everyone's working their equal share, or they were sick that day, something like that. So this gives a lot of structure for them. All right, I believe that was it. Make sure there was nothing here. We talked about visiting different breakout rooms. It also helps. I'll sometimes ask the TAs, like, how are they doing? Do you think they'll need more time? And sometimes they'll say, yeah, they're only about halfway. And so then I'll broadcast a message and say, hey, it looks like you need a little more time. We're going to extend it. Most of the time we keep the tasks small enough that the pace stays on track, because I want to make sure we get to the end by the end of class. And then my tips would be, just like you would in a regular class for any other thing you're doing, is to provide clear instructions and explicitly state your expectations. And then the other thing is, I want to always do something with what they produce. It helps make their work valuable to them. So when we come back, we always discuss, we always share. Sometimes Zoom's nice because you can have them share their screen so they can share some of their work that way, and we can have a discussion, and it's another way to build this community of people learning together. So in examples, those were actually Canvas surveys that I had them complete ahead of time as part of their responding to the videos they watched. It was a sort of flipped classroom setting. And sometimes I would show those, if it was just a bar chart, like a straight up bar chart, I would show them directly from Canvas. It was easy to do. But when I wanted to do something like a pie chart, like what you saw, I actually exported the data real quick over into Google spreadsheet and made a chart that way. But I've also shared that when we do Zoom polls, it'll show those live, and you can have Zoom record the responses if you want to compare things. One thing I was nice about doing it ahead of time is I taught 2 sections of the same class. And so I was able to show them, like, hey, when there was something different. Most of the time their responses were the same. But if there was a different distribution, or say, hey, by the way, that's kind of interesting. I wonder what's going on there. And so that kind of helps them see there's more than just their class going on. But those were Google charts. I don't know, like offhand, what the different participant numbers are for the different tools. One like workaround, and sometimes it works, it depends on what you're asking, is if let's say it only allows 40 participants, but you have 80 students in your class, then you can have them in pairs answer the poll together. So you only have 40 people answer. You can group them like that. It's a little bit trickier because then you have to put them in a breakout room together, have them answer the poll and come back. But it is possible. Poll Everywhere works really well. I don't remember the numbers for that one. And Socrative is another good one. But I'd have to go look up what their participation numbers are and the cost for that.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very complete, and those are a great set of advice for keeping students engaged. So, one of the things that I wanted to continue this conversation is engagement and interaction. They're kind of go hand in hand, right? So. But what does it require from the faculty's end to keep students engaged? And I think one of the things that come to my mind is you need to have a plan. So this is very important during live class. I mean, you probably have taught your class for some time, and I mean, when you're in the room, you do things very naturally, but sometimes if you have some planning for your class, like if you already have the specific questions that you want to ask based on on your experience, that what other questions have been in the past. So if you collect this data and use it in your advantage, you can make your class super interactive. And I just wanted to add that both synchronous and asynchronous type of interactions are important, so the conversation doesn't stop once the live class or the Zoom session stops. So in order to maximize and give continuity to the conversation and create a learning community, it is important to create, for example, some discussion questions or discussion forums that carry that same type of topic, or that carries the conversation outside of the room or the virtual environment. So what I was mentioning is that your interaction strategy, it's great if it tries to solve questions before they happen. So based on your experience in the class, you can already come up with, hey, students have most of the time asked about this topic because this is what's usually for them. So you can have already those responses or kind of interactions pre-populated in your class. So now we're gonna discuss a little bit more about both kind of interactions, synchronous and asynchronous.
Thank you, Jerry. And now to continue the presentation, we're going to turn it over to another one of our instructional designers, Lainey. And Lainey Draper, another one of our instructional designers in our ESAL office. And she's going to present and talk about preparation on some of the things that Jerry introduced. Lainey?
Mm-hmm. So a lot of the examples that Shauna gave are great tips for when you actually have them live in a Zoom session. She did a lot of the polling. So you can also do things when you're asynchronous. And so you're not there for them in the live class, but your presence is still important. And the ways that I wanted to discuss of how to make sure you have that presence in your course, even when you're not in live sessions, is using feedback. So this image is part of the quiz function. And if I was going into a quiz, like one of the examples that we've talked about or given is have kind of a check for understanding. So I know Shauna talked about in her class, she had a lot of the lecture material was pre-populated, pre-recorded, and so she uses the live sessions to do a lot of the engagement. But you can also create these kind of check for understanding quizzes before they get to that live session or to replace that live session. So, you may be just asking 2 or 3 questions in a quiz, and in order to give your feedback to them immediately, you can populate that inside the quiz itself. So what you're looking at is here's the correct answer that you put in. Here's another possible answer, but it's incorrect. So I can make a comment. You see this red box, and this is my feedback to them that's telling them, think again about, your answer. And you could even go into more detail about, if you look back at the lecture material on this particular slide, you might get more information. So you can kind of make that little area as detailed as you want to. And you can also give positive feedback as well. So where you see this green box, that's where you can give positive feedback. So pre-populating that feedback helps kind of automate interaction engagement when you're asynchronous. And then the other way to be present and be engaged in an asynchronous setting is by using the discussion board. And what you're seeing right now is actually a discussion board that's already pre-populated into the blueprint that Academic Innovation provides for you. So when you're getting ready for the spring, make sure you go look for this and you can use it. It's already going to be published for you. If you notice here on the right, it says blueprint. So I know this is the one from Academic Innovation, and it shows me it's already published. So make sure you go and look for that. And the benefit of actually using this course question board is you can kind of tailor some responses for this and answer questions to the whole class that usually come in through email. So you're kind of being more efficient with your time. You're not answering the same questions over and over again. And this is also something that I know a lot of professors will have the TAs help them with, is to monitor the discussion boards. And like a lot of times what happens is you can kind of to do more engagement using the discussion boards, you put a grade on it, and it's more for like kind of forcing them to do maybe a discussion that's more tailored to your module topic. So you have some kind of prompt that you give them, and they're more apt to use that kind of discussion. The other thing you can do, and I've seen professors do this, is you're getting those discussions. You're getting those questions through email, and then you post your answer on the discussion. So kind of they know if they send you an email, the answer is probably going to go up on the discussion, and then they'll have other people kind of respond to that. So they feel less like, this is a stupid question and nobody else has it.
Another
so if you
thing
kind of create the pattern. Go ahead.
So another thing you could do is make it part of your class policy. Like, hey, if you have like questions that are not personal, those need to go through the discussion forum, and I will respond them there. I guess Lainey's suggestion, it will be also good if you tie a little percentage in there. That might also serve as a motivation to use those. But I know it's a little bit hard.
Yeah. And then also I saw in the chat somebody uses, an FAQ. So that's another thing you could set up, and you could, it could be a part of the discussion board, or it can be a part of, a getting started module somehow where you answer all those questions. Of course, they're not all guaranteed to read them, but it's a good step to to try to become more efficient. The last thing I was going to talk about is kind of responding to their assignments, especially, or their quizzes. What you're looking at here is part of the speed grader inside Canvas, and you have an option to use a rubric, which also kind of speeds up your time, and you can pre-populate feedback using the rubric. But another thing you can do is, if you look at these buttons here at the bottom, you have different formats that you can create feedback for the student. So this box here is a text comment that you could put. Depending on your assignment, like if you had a Word document or PDF or something, you can mark up on the document, but and then attach it. So that's what this paperclip is. But you could also do an audio or a video comment as well. So that's some way to maybe give a more personal feedback in your presence inside the course.
I'm not sure, but I think you could also use this type of media in the discussion questions. I don't know if Lainey or Christine can add to that, because I think students can also participate by posting a video if you let them. I'm not sure if that works on discussion
Yeah,
questions.
I mean, I think they can attach files, I know. So they could attach some kind of file kind of on their end. But anywhere you use a speed grader, whether that's on kind of an assignment or a discussion, you're going to see these icons here at the bottom. And I'm going to
reuse the responses from your previous semester to already create like an FAQ that builds on and becomes.
That's a good.
Yeah. What I don't know is if those will be preserved as anonymous responses now that you bring them over from a previous term. I certainly think that would happen, that they would not carry the names of the students.
Right.
All right, thank you, Lainey, for that. And now we have just a few minutes left, so we're going to ask Christine to share with us some ideas about planning for engagement during live synchronous delivery. So we've talked about polling and breakout rooms as one great strategy for engagement, but there are some other things that can be done, and Christine will share some ideas with us. Christine?
All right. Hopefully everybody can hear me this time.
Yes.
Okay. So if you could go ahead to the next slide, Randy. So as Jerry was mentioning earlier, it's good to keep a balance of synchronous and asynchronous elements. And I think sometimes we think about a class having to be either synchronous, fully synchronous, or fully asynchronous. And that's really not the case, because you can mix those elements up to create a more ideal learning experience for your students. So research has found that students positively perceive synchronous learning because they receive that immediate feedback and they feel like they're part of a community. And they also appreciate the aspects of asynchronous learning that allows them to work the learning experience into their schedules and enables them to engage with the content at a more deliberate pace and at a deeper level. So finding a balance between those formats really helps supporting students' cognitive and social needs to promote better levels of engagement. And so structuring your class in order to designate synchronous time for collaboration and active learning participation, you might want to analyze the materials and the activities that you have and decide which ones could be presented asynchronously in order to just create or free up some time synchronously for just weekly sessions, weekly live sessions that can be used for they can be used for teamwork sessions or targeted study tutoring sessions, all of these different things. And just making sure that always that every activity is purposefully designed around your clear learning purpose, and eliminating all of anything that's not directly related to achieving your learning goals, and keeping the students engaged on with the materials as well. All right. Thank you, Randy.
Thank you, Christine. And we've already heard from Lainey. And so in closing, just to cover some of our main points today, we've talked about how engagement increases student learning and student satisfaction. We've talked about how planning for interaction and engagement yields the best results. So good engagement requires some advanced planning. Feedback in asynchronous courses is an important way of engaging students. Pre-recording lessons allows opportunities for increased engagement in a live setting. And Zoom breakout rooms and polling are useful and easy to use ways to promote student engagement. We also have some references and resources here. We'll be sending these to you in an email message after today's presentation, but there are several resources available online that present more information from research on student engagement and other techniques, and we'll be sharing those links with you. And our email address is also on this screen, engrlearntech@tamu.edu. If you ever have any questions or need support from our staff here in eCell, then you can send email to that address, and we'll be happy to respond in any way that we can. So in closing, Dr. Thomas, thank you again for presenting for us today. And we've really come to the end of our time. I really appreciate everyone's participation in the chat today. Lots of great information was shared from our presenters and our participants. We appreciate everyone being here, and that will conclude our workshop for today. Thank you all for coming.